Hi guys, hope you're okay. This is the representation PowerPoint for this week. So we've got quite a lot of representation theory to cover in this course. The theory itself isn't big, but the way that we have to apply it is quite broad and varied. So this is really going to be your first test of how well you're coping with the content on this course. So today I want to help you learn and make your revision materials for the representation theory. We're going to apply rep and media language theory to a variety of texts. And just like you did last week, we're going to start confidently analysing unseen texts before we move on to our next set text, which is tide. So as always, remote students, make sure you complete the engagement question at the start of the lesson and submit the work by the end of the lesson. Otherwise, we are going to have to put you in referral. We're going to have to put you on orange or red for engagement, which we don't really want to be doing. So you need to really be mature and make sure that you're doing the work now. Okay, so for representation, we've got a few key terms. We have ideology, first of all, which is a belief system that we can see in any text that's being displayed. So, for example, a washing up liquid advert might put in the ideology that women should stay at home. An advert for Barbie dolls might say that girls need to be pretty, or girls play gently, or girls are nurturing. So the ideology is the belief system that we're being shown in the text, and we can react to that in different ways. The next term is quite a big one. It's hegemony or hegemony. Now, those of us that are doing sociology might come across this term anyway, but all this means is leadership or dominance of one group over others. So in this country here, we have a hegemonic patriarchy where our society tends to be run by a group of men, but we also have our politicians in Westminster who are our dominant group, who lead the rest of us and show dominance over us. So if they create the laws, we have to live within those laws. And society largely is constructed to benefit this dominant group, sometimes to the detriment or sometimes hurting other groups that perhaps aren't part of this small dominant group. The next term is subvert or challenge, which is to go against what is expected of you. This goes along with conform. So conform, which is 2 down there, which is to go along with what's expected of you, is the opposite of challenge. So we could talk about binary opposites. You would say that subvert is the binary opposite of conform. We then have the status quo. Some of us may have heard this term before. It just means the existing balance of power. So status is to do with power and quo means balance. This can be disrupted if enough people unify and fight for change. So we're seeing this in America at the moment with the many, many protests that are taking part, both for the Black Lives Matter movement, for kind of people wanting to reopen the Breonna Taylor case, for people kind of activating and unifying and getting people to register to vote, and kind of postal ballots and fighting fake news, etc. So the existing balance of power can be disrupted if enough people fight for change. And those people that are in charge of our hegemonic structures largely are resistant to that disruption because it takes power away from them. So we're going to start seeing how this is demonstrated in the texts that we study. When we come to do our next text, which is an advert for a washing up powder, we'll see how that status quo is resisting challenge. And then we have, again, that binary opposite, like we were talking about with stereotypes, of males being active and females being passive. So males traditionally being portrayed as decisive and powerful, and with agency, so with control over themselves, whereas females are portrayed as passive objects to be viewed, but without that agency, without that independent thought. So we're going to come across a theorist later on, Lisa Van Zoon, who talks about males being active and females being passive. Now, that's your first lot of terms for ideology. It might be worth pausing now, listening to that again, getting some flashcards made or getting some notes made so that you fully understand those terms. If you start to slip now and start to think, it's okay, I can do it later, you'll very quickly find that this starts to snowball. Okay? So pause it now, get those terms down, and then I will take you through the next slide. Okay, so our second lot of terms for this part of the course are here. And a lot of these we've already talked about. So stereotypes, we've spoken about with Stewart Hall, narrow perceptions of a group of people that limit how they're seen by others. We then come across something called gender performance. So we have a theorist called Judith Butler who studies gender theory, and she's written a lot about how gender is constructed by society and what that means for queer people as well. So when she says gender is a social construct, what she means is every single baby that is born not knowing whether they're a boy or a girl. And all that happens is we repeat rituals that are socially accepted and reinforced by those media representations. So if we have a baby boy, he might be given a football kit. When he's born, he might be given things that are blue. He might be given things with pirates on, or cowboys, or aliens, or spaceships, whereas girls might be given pretty dresses. They might be given Disney baby grows. They might be given dolls. They might be given soft pink things. And by doing that, we create a series of rituals, a series of things that we consistently do that construct what we believe gender to be. So that's Judith Butler. We'll come to that later. Singular and pluralistic identities we've covered with David Gauntlet. So David Gauntlet says that a product or a text only gives one type of representation. And when that happens, we call that a singular identity. There we go. He says that in the olden days, so in the 1950s, whatever, adverts and media texts normally gave singular representations of identity. So just one version of age or gender or ethnicity for audiences to build their identity around. Whereas nowadays, we offer pluralistic identities. So that means a product or a text that gives a variety of representations to the audience, and more modern texts tend to offer pluralistic identities, again, particularly this year. So you might notice on social media feeds lots more inclusion of people of different sizes, different abilities, different ethnicities, different races. We might see a lot more debate about kind of Native American landmarks and the rights of Native American people, or the rights of people that were brought from one country to another to work as slaves. So those pluralistic identities are really important when we're looking at texts. Discourse is one of your more difficult terms on the course. Those of us that are doing perhaps English language may hear this term over the next couple of years, but discourse is basically speech. And in this course, we can either say discourse or we say ideological discourse, which is just speech that shows the beliefs of the person that is speaking, or the producer of the text, or the person that is paying for the text. So we're going to see evidence of this when we come to our advertising PowerPoint, which is next lesson. And we'll have lots and lots of examples of discourse as well. Agency is control over how one chooses to represent themselves. So we all have a fair amount of agency over the way that we look, our hair, our shoes, our clothes, the way that we speak, the people that we speak to, the things that we want to say. We largely have control over those. So that's agency. And we talk about, when we look at our texts, we'll talk about whether agency is given to or removed from the people that we're seeing presented. And the last term we need for representation is patriarchy. So patriarchy is a society dominated and built by males that expressly benefits them over other groups. So we do live in a patriarchic society in the United Kingdom, whereby the majority of our rulers have been white males over the last 1,000 years or so. And so our laws and our ways of living have benefited those groups expressly over others. So this is evident perhaps in the private sector, where women are perhaps looked over for promotions if they have a child, because they're seen as not being as committed to the job as a male who doesn't have children. So that's patriarchy, really. And we'll come to use all of these terms over the course of the next few weeks. So our first theorist is Stewart Hall. Now, we cover Stewart Hall a lot on this course because his theory is kind of central to pretty much everything that we do. So we've got Stewart Hall, Roland Barthes, and Levi-Strauss, and those are the three guys that really break apart the way that we communicate and how and why we communicate. So he says that relationship between concepts and signs is governed by codes. And the way we would think about this, the example I've put on the screen here, is for the colour red. So the colour red in itself doesn't mean anything until we anchor it. So when we anchor it to a candle, we have fire, we have warmth. When we anchor it to a heart, we have love. For the apple, we have health. And for the Red Cross, we perhaps have blood, or we have kind of the need to care for other people. He also says that stereotyping, hang on. There we go. Stereotyping as a form of representation reduces people to a few simple characteristics or traits. So you'll be able to see on this slide 3 stereotypes of the French, of America, and of England. So the way that the French are seen from outside their country, baguettes, facial hair, berets, stripy tops. Americans are seen as kind of overly zealous, in love with the flag, red, white, and blue, perhaps conservative, perhaps not the most intelligent. And the English tend to be seen abroad as hooligans, particularly when we come to football tournaments. So stereotyping reduces people to a few simple characteristics. And then he says stereotyping tends to occur where there are inequalities of power. So what this means is we have a group that is higher up in the hierarchy, higher up on the power kind of scale, and then they basically punch down. And in that way, they create representations of other groups, so people that are seen as subordinate, so perhaps people of colour, women of colour, people that have a disability of some kind, people that have mental health issues of some kind, and then they portray those things as other. So other means different to you. Okay, so we have us versus them. I am the me, and then everything else is other to that. So the example I've put on the screen here is one of the Black Lives Matter protests. And there is a very definite inequality of power here, where we have seen kind of over the last 400 years, people of colour, and particularly Black Africans and Black African Americans, have been kind of systemically deprived, brutalised, murdered. And what we're seeing now is that inequality of power finally being kicked back against. So the status quo is finally being disrupted. In order to show that you've understood this, I would like you to take a minute and just write down or just note down whether there are any inequalities of power visible in your life. So maybe it's at work, maybe it's in your friendship groups, maybe it's with your siblings, maybe you see it between your parents or with a carer, maybe you see it kind of on a larger scale, maybe you are engaging with the news and you're able to see where there are inequalities of power visible in your life. So just take a minute, have a think, and apply this theory to your own life. Okay, so our next theorist is David Gauntlet, and he talks about identity, and we've covered this quite a lot with Kiss of the Vampire. So he says the media provides us with tools that we use to construct our identities, and what that means is we look at images of people, we look at videos of people, we listen to interviews with people, and we decide what we like, what we don't like, and what we are going to kind of absorb into our own identities. So we use the resources that are given to us visually and audiovisually through the things that we see every day, and we use those to construct our identities. So the question I want to ask you is, who are your role models and why? So who do you like, and what about them do you try to live in your life? So Gauntlet also says that while in the past, the media tended to convey singular, straightforward messages about ideal types of male and female identities, the media today offer us a more diverse range of stars, so a more pluralistic range of stars, icons and characters from whom we may pick and mix different ideas. So you've got two examples, two adverts on this page here. One is from World War II in America. The soldiers need our help. Gather round, American women. Turns out you gals are useful after all. So the suggestion there is that women were useless before this because they weren't able to leave the home. They did not work in factories. They could not work in factories. They were seen as pretty. They were seen as child bearers and domesticated, whereas in this advert now, we're asking women to step up and work in factories. And compare that to the This Girl Can advert, where we have a young woman wearing a hijab, kickboxing, and it says a kick right in the stereotype. So here we are directly challenging stereotype theory and offering a more pluralistic range of representations. Okay, next we come on to Lisbeth van Zunen, and she discusses feminist theory. She says that gender is constructed through discourse. So gender is constructed through speech and language, and that its meaning varies according to the cultural and historical context. So again, I've put two images here. I've put on the left-hand side a little bit of clip art with those two figures. Semiotically, we can deduce that we have a woman who is cleaning, holding a baby's bottle with an apron, and a man who is wearing a tie and carrying a briefcase and wearing a blue suit. So the use of that pink and blue, first of all, defines the gender, and then we can see through our cultural knowledge what the gender roles here actually are, because we've experienced that speech before. Then the second image here is of somebody who is gender neutral, who has ripped apart the word female to show that they are gender fluid, or that they don't use kind of gendered pronouns. So the meaning of gender changes with historical context, and particularly in the last 5 or 10 years, we've started to broaden our gender discourse to include people who are perhaps non-binary, or people who don't conform to binary gender roles. So people who perhaps aren't straight, people who don't consider themselves to be one particular gender or the other, people who are perhaps gender fluid. Our language has changed a lot in the time that you've grown up, to the point where this image of the person ripping apart the word female isn't unusual to us, or isn't something that we really question. So Van Zunen, in the adverts that we study, the older ones, we would perhaps be able to say that for the cultural and historical context of the adverts that we've looked at, that because the Vampire and Tide, traditional gender roles are constructed through the discourse of those texts, whereby the woman is expected to be pale, pretty, weak, and the man is expected to be strong, dominant, powerful. So that's kind of what she means about gender being constructed through discourse or speech. And she says that the display of women's bodies as objects to be looked at is a core element of Western patriarchal structure. So it's up to us, really, as we look at all of these texts, to see whether that's true. Are women's bodies displayed in a way that is different to the way that male bodies are displayed? And as viewers, are we, as the audience, complicit in that displaying of women's bodies? So the first poster we have here is for a film called Hall Pass, which just looks like a cinematic masterpiece, where we have Owen Wilson and Jason Sudeikis looking off into the distance as if they were heroes. 1 week, no rules. We see them in Hawaiian shirts, see them in trousers, and then we see 3 scantily clad females, one of whom doesn't even have a head. So we literally have women being displayed as objects. The only 2 people that have an identity on this poster are the 2 males, because they are the only ones with any anchorage. The women in this poster are anchored to the men, showing that they are perhaps the conquest, the things that are going to be chased, the prizes at the end of this week. And the second image here is an image, an advert for a program called Mad Men, which was set in the 1960s in New York at an advertising agency. And here we see the four men with their gaze directed towards the woman who is very brightly lit, walking towards the camera, wiggling her hips as she walks, and she knows that she's being portrayed as an object. So Van Zunen says that women's bodies being displayed as objects is a core element of Western patriarchal culture. So European, British, American culture very much objectifies women. And she also says that in mainstream culture, the visual and narrative codes that are used to construct the male body as a spectacle, so something that is meant to be watched and something that is meant to be followed, are very different from those visual and narrative codes that are used to objectify the female body. So in this image here, we have Leonardo DiCaprio and Margot Robbie in The Wolf of Wall Street. And although we see that Margot Robbie has the power in this image as her heel is on Leonardo DiCaprio's face, we see that these two characters are constructed very differently. So we see the male entirely covered, wearing professional business attire, so we expect him to be powerful, wealthy, intelligent, whereas the woman, who the light again is shining on, her hair is highlighted, her skin is highlighted, the curves of her face are highlighted, and we see that her legs are almost entirely revealed in those heels, so those impractical shoes. And we see that she clearly has put in a lot more effort into the way that she looks. We also see that she's probably kept her body looking like this, even though there is a baby in the house. So she's most definitely being objectified in a way that Leonardo DiCaprio is not. So have a think about that and tell me, how does this image prove this point? Okay, next we're going to come to Judith Butler, who talks about gender performativity. Now, Judith Butler is a lecturer in America, and she says that identity is performed, and she says it's constructed through this manufactured set of acts. And all that means is we don't think about the way that we present ourselves because it's been done so much that it's become invisible. Okay, so kind of like Roland Barthes talks about myth and naturalization. So we have here three images. We have David Gandy modeling for Marks and Spencer. We have some kind of Instagram influencer. And in the middle, we have Marlene Dietrich, who was a German actress in the 1920s and 30s. And we see here the lady with the blonde hair and the V-neck and the polka dot dress, with her hair softly framing her face, is wearing kind of gentle makeup, is in a very clean looking house. So this gender identity is being performed. No one has told this girl when she was kind of a tiny baby, well, she hasn't been told to do this, but she is perhaps doing it because she's seen it so much. And the same could be said of the man in the suit there with the short hair, the facial hair, the suit, who is outside, whose hair is moving. So again, we have that action code, who has the pocket square, which is a connotation of wealth. And his direct gaze with the lack of a smile is very different to that of the soft gaze, with the kind of parted lips of the woman. And then in the middle, we have Marlene Dietrich, who has the short hair, who is wearing a suit, who is smoking, who's wearing a top hat. So we have this clash of masculine and feminine performative codes. We see that she's wearing shoes, but we can see that she's perhaps wearing nylon or silk stockings underneath. So we have here kind of, like I was saying, a clash of that gender performance, and she is manufacturing a new set of acts. So she is actively challenging or subverting what is expected of people in terms of performing their gender role. And she says that there is no gender identity behind expressions of gender. So she says that all gendered expressions are learned, and that as babies we have our gender assigned to us by others. And then we have two examples here. We have Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye in the Middle, who is very much a challenger of gender expectations, but is also an incredible advocate for LGBTQ rights, an incredible, intelligent man who perhaps isn't taken seriously because of the campness of the way that he speaks. Okay, and then we have on the left here a gender reveal cake. So this is American, perhaps quite obviously, and we see it says tractors or tiaras. The word tractors in pink, the word tractors in green, the word tiaras in pink, and then we have green and pink icing all around the cake. We have a tiara and a tractor up on the top, and there we have the very first expression of the gender of the unborn baby. So we perhaps have a baby who is not born yet, who doesn't know whether they're going to like tractors or tiaras, but is going to be told whether they like tractors or tiaras based on the colour of the inside of that cake. So gender reveals, particularly in the past kind of 5 to 10 years, have become a huge deal in America, whereby there's kind of a whole thing done to tell the family what gender they're having, and that then, or what sex they're having, and that then helps them to attribute gender identity to the child. And it's up to us really to see whether that's valid and to see why and how that has been done. And she also says that performativity is not a singular act, it is a repetition and a ritual. So we can see here two mothers and daughters. We see the mother and the daughter on the left holding a smoothie, wearing the same dress, wearing kind of identical shoes with similar hair, the same smile. So we see the mother performing the repetition of the ritual and the daughter repeating that ritual because her mother has told her to. And then on the right, we see a mother and a daughter on a spa day with their hair in rollers, reading a menu, having had their toes painted. So what I would like you to think about now is, what rituals do you take part in to outwardly present your chosen identity? What do you do every day that tells the world who you are? Okay, take 2 minutes and do that for me. So that's it for our representation theory. I'm going to give you a Kahoot for the people that are in. The people that aren't in, you're going to get your Kahoot next time I see you if you're in Sheena's class. For now, these are your terms. I would like you to please make your flashcards, make your revision resources for for all of those gender theorists, please. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask me or Susan. Okay, thanks.